Scriptable objects are data containers which exist as assets within a project files. They are a great way to store data or money behaviors might need, like health, speed, or attack damage. For example, if you are making an RPG game, you might want to create alt items in your game such as weapons, armors, potions as scriptable objects. But as your project grows, normal scriptable object pipelines become hard to manage. In this video, I will show you how I manage my scriptable objects using the free asset scriptable object database from the asset store. To start, let's download the scriptable object database asset from the asset store and open the sample scene. There are two features that are being managed by the scriptable object database in the sample scene. To start, we have the items, which each item in the game is an scriptable object managed by the scriptable object database, and we can pick this item from the ground just by clicking over them. You can see I can click the items and I can collect these items. Also, if we press the I key in our keyboard, we can open the player inventory. And this works just like any other player inventory. We can move the items around. We can drop the items back in the ground if we want. But there are three special items that I can show you what they do. We have the mana potion, the poison potion, and the health potion. Which brings me to the second feature being managed by the scriptable object database. You can see we had in the top left corner, we had two bars that are the player attribute. Each attribute in the game is also a scriptable object that is being managed by the scriptable object database. And we can modify these attributes by using these potions. And you can manage what they do. If we double click the mana potion, you can see we gain a little bit of mana. If we double click the poison potion, we lost a little bit of health. And if we use the health potion, of course we gain health. Also, there is this boss over here that you can click. And it works like a loot boss or a treasure boss. You can also open your inventory at the same time and you can get items from the loot boss. And if you want, for some reason, you can also put your items in the loot boss. In order to show you how the scriptable object database works and how it helps you to manage your scriptable objects, let's start by analyzing how the attributes work in the game. When you use the scriptable object database, it provides you with a nice editor window where you can manage, edit, and create new scriptable objects for your items. To show this, we had two databases in the game. And because we had two databases, we had one editor window for each database. We had the attributes editor window and we had the items editor window. For now, let's focus on the attributes. And you can see we only had two attributes in game. We had the name, the icon, and the color. For now, we don't have any icon for the attributes because I didn't provide any icon that represent the attributes in this sample. But I will show you with the items why it's a good idea to use different icons for different items. For now, we don't have icon for this. We only had the attribute color, which we can see is the color being used in the attributes bar to modify just the color for the attribute. For example, if we use different color for the HP and the mana, and we can start again. You can see we manage here the color for the attributes. Also, we can go over the UI and you can see we have the HP bar and the mana bar. Something else you have by working with the scriptable object database is this dropdown that you can see here. And in this dropdown, you will see add the audience you have from your database. This is a very good idea because when you are working with several items in your scriptable object database, and you have maybe hundreds of items, thousands of items, I don't know how many items you can have in your game, you can reference those items by using a dropdown, and we can we had a nice search bar that you can just write the name of your item. If you had too many items in your game, that is possible. For example, I can use the name for the attribute we are looking for. And this is a nice way to reference the scriptable objects from our game. You don't need to drag and drop. You don't need to go to your project and finding whatever. Because you know that whenever you are working on your project becomes bigger and bigger. So you have more folders, more items, more whatever. And becomes hard to go and find in all your folders your items. And if we use an icon, I will show you here why maybe it's a good idea to have an icon, even if you are not using the icon. For example, in this case, I am not showing the icon in the game because probably I can show the icon in the UI. But even if you are not using the icon, probably it's a good idea to use the icon, because if you have different icons for or attributes in our case. First, we can see the icon, so it is easier to identify the attribute we are looking for if we have too many items. And also, you can see here in the drop down, we have the icons showing here. And when you select the whatever thing you want to select, you can see the item being dragged in the same inspector. Also, if we can close this tab, and you can see we have a little button at the left side from the drop down. And if we click this arrow button, it will take us to the editor window, and it will select for us the item we had selected. In the editor window, we have most of the operations we need to handle or manage our attributes database. For example, we can create new items by pressing this arrow button, and we have all the options we have for our database. We can create a new item definition, and we can use whatever name we want. We can use a new icon if we want, and we can click save, and we can go to our attribute bar, and you can see in the inspector we already had our new attribute here. We can also duplicate selected items. For example, we can duplicate the HP if we want. We can delete items. You can select the item you want to delete. For example, we can delete this item because we are not going to use it. And you got this little warning here that tells you that these changes in the database, you can undo those changes because you are deleting an scriptable object, and when you are deleting a scriptable object, you can undo this change. So you have to be aware of that. So if you are ready to delete it, just delete forever. And we can also mode items. Selected item and mode up, or we can select the option mode down. And we can organize the items in our database. Also, you might be wondering, like, what is actually the database, or where the database is stored? And that actually depends on you, because when you use the scriptable object database, you had the option to create the database, and you can go to whatever menu you had declared. I will show you later how you can do this in your code. But in this case, we had the menu in create sample database, and we had the two databases we are using. And you can see we already had the two databases here. But if I wanted, for some reason, I can create another database. But something you need to be aware of is that in theory, you can only have one database in your game. But it is normal that you wanted to have different databases in your game, right? Because, for example, maybe you had a debut database that you are testing new items or different item configuration, or maybe different attributes in your game. So you had a different database you for testing that. In that case, if you wanted to have different database in your game because you are testing something, or you had a new feature you are working, or whatever, you can actually have several databases from the same type. The only thing you need is that you can select the database, and you see we had a boolean here that says is enabled. Just make sure that just one database is enabled at the time. For example, we can disable the database that had our items. We can select disable this database. And we had a new database that is empty. So when we go here and we open again our attributes editor, you can see we won't have anything here because it is using the new database that doesn't have any items. The same thing goes for the inspector. You can see we don't have anything in the inspector, even so it is actually using the scriptable object from the other database that is disabled. You can see we can select a new other item because we don't have anything in the new database. But we can disable this database and enable the correct database we are using. And you can see it is opening the correct editor window. Now, to show you how extendable a feature can be using the scriptable object database, let's create a new attribute for our attribute system. Let's go open the attributes editor. And let's create a new attribute. Let's call this new attribute stamina. Let's use the yellow color, the normal yellow color for an stamina bar. And we just need to clone whatever of this bar we want. We just need to duplicate it. Let's call it stamina bar. Let's use a different position, a different size. Let's tell it that we want to use the stamina instead of the mana. And also in our player inventory controller, we have this attributes component that it has the attributes, the current attribute values for our player. Let's create a new attribute and let's use the stamina. And we can use the max value for 100 probably and start with half of that value. We hit play. Now, as you can see, without making any changes on our code, without needing to recompile, just by modifying on the scriptable database and using this nice little dropdown, you can see we had created a new attribute in our game. Now that we have created a new attribute for our character, let's create a new button that can modify our stamina value. Let's go and open our items editor. Sample items editor. And let's duplicate whatever of these buttons we want. Let's use the HP button. And use the duplicate menu. And we have a new item. Let's call this item stamina button. Let's use the stamina attribute. And let's modify the stamina by 40. Save. And let's go and create a new item in the floor or in our game. Let's duplicate the HP button. We can call this stamina button. And in this little script we have what I call the item gain representation. And this is just a physical representation for an item. So we'll say that this item is a physical representation for the stamina button. Let's play it again. We pick our stamina button, open the inventory, and you can see that when I double click this item, I will lose it, and of course it will grant me 40 points in stamina. In order to use the scriptable object database in your games, there are a few scripts you need to create in order to access all the features from the scriptable object database. For example, I will show you the scripts I needed to create to use the attributes database. The first script we need to create is the definition of the item. I like to call it definition, but you can call it whatever you want. In this case, it is a class called attribute definition, and it needs to stem from the scriptable item. The scriptable item is just the item that will be stored in the Scriptable object database. The Scriptable item has by default a name, has an icon, and also an ID. It has a unique ID for every item. Next, we need the attribute definition database, or this is the actual database of the actual Scriptable object that is storing the items in our game. For example, in this case, the attribute database is the attribute definition database, and it is holding all the Scriptable items. The only thing we need in the attribute definition database is the create asset menu, and you can pass here the custom menu you want to use. In this case, I am using the sample database attribute database. As I showed you before, you can use create sample database, and you had the two database in the sample. You need to extend from the Scriptable database, and you need to pass the attribute definition, or in this case, whatever you are storing in the database. Also, we need, or we don't need, but it will be nice to have 3 editors, one for the attribute or the item, one for the attribute definition database or the database, and one for the editor window, or in this case, the attribute definition database editor window. We need the attribute definition editor. It needs to extend from the Scriptable item default editor. And we call this one default editor because if you go here, you can see we had two kind of editors. We had the Scriptable item default editor or the Scriptable item UI toolkit editor. The Scriptable item UI toolkit editor is just in case you are using the UI toolkit editor for your editors. If you don't know what is the UI toolkit editor or you are not using, you can always use the default editor. That is the normal way of creating editors in Unity. We need the attribute definition database editor. The same thing, we need to tell it that this is a custom editor for the attribute definition database, and we need to extend from the Scriptable database editor. We don't need anything else here. And finally, the attribute definition database editor window. You need to extend from the database editor window. I created here a function that you can use to open this editor window using the Windows sample attributes editor. You can go here, window, sample, attributes editor, items editor, and it will call this function that it opens the editor window. You can also open the editor window by using the inspector for the database. You can see we had a button that says open editor window, and it will show you just the editor window. So in theory, you don't need this, but it is always a good idea to create this kind of menu so it is easy to open and you don't need to find your database in your project structure. And I had an override here that is just the window title. If you open the editor window, you will see, we can see here attribute definition editor. It is the string we are passing here. And as you can see, most of these classes are generic classes. That means you need to pass some kind of type into the classes. So like I said before, for the Scriptable database, we just need to pass the item we are storing. For the definition editor window, we need to pass the editor window, the database type, and the definition type. And for the last one, we need to pass only the database and the item we're storing in the database. Maybe this is kind of hard to remember. So, for example, in my case, whatever I do is just when I want to create a new database, I just go here, I just copy over the 5 scripts I need to create, I just copy them into a new folder and just rename all the classes. So you don't need to remember all the types you will need to pass it or all the classes you need to extend from. But if you are creating without copying the scripts, you can also go to the definition for the classes. And you can see clearly what you need to pass. You can need to pass the item editor window, the database, and the entry. In this case, you go to the base class. The entry is the thing or the item you are storing in the database. So you can always go to the base class and you will see what you need to pass.